why would an all-powerful, absolute creator ever feel the need to swear an oath? I mean, just think about it for a second.
Right.
Put yourself in a courtroom. You're on the witness stand. The opposing lawyer is completely tearing your alibi apart. The jury is looking at you with this intense skepticism, and you can just feel the narrative slipping through your fingers.
Yeah, you're losing ground.
Exactly. What do? You raise your right hand, your voice shakes a bit, and you say, I swear to God I'm telling the truth. We swear oaths when we're losing. We swear when we're insecure,
It's a defense mechanism.
Totally. A defense mechanism born out of human weakness. So when you open an ancient text, a text that claims to be the ultimate architecture of reality, and you see the creator of the universe swearing an oath, is that a sign of weakness? Are we looking at a desperate plea from the author for you to believe in some dusty old book?
See, it completely shatters that assumption the very second you actually analyze the source code.
Wait, the source code?
Yeah, because the dynamic you just described, that human defense mechanism, it assumes the creator is somehow subject to human insecurity. The texts and the deep linguistic analyses we are looking at for today's deep dive reframe this entirely.
Okay, how so?
It is not a plea. It is the ultimate, undeniable flex of a master programmer. I mean, the architect of the universe isn't swearing because there's a risk you might not believe him. He is swearing to prove that the architecture of his code is completely, unequivocally unhackable.
Unhackable.
Right. If you're approaching this text as merely, a historical document or like a collection of ancient moral poetry or just some relic of the past, you are utterly missing the point of what it claims to be.
You're reading it wrong.
Completely wrong. The sources we're diving into today argue that this is actually the most advanced active operating system ever designed for the human mind. And to understand how it functions, we have to stop reading it like a novel and start looking at the exact underlying code.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because calling an ancient religious text an operating system is a massive, monumental claim.
It is, yeah.
Because when I think of an OS, I think of, iOS, Windows, Linux, the foundational software that manages my computer's hardware and allows all the other applications to run.
Exactly. It's the environment everything else lives in.
Right, and it's active. It's constantly processing background data. It catches errors. It prevents the machine from completely crashing. You are saying this ancient text functions exactly like that for the human brain.
That is exactly what the sources are claiming, yes.
And to prove that, our source materials insist we have to, abandon standard translations entirely. We have to use a highly specific analytical method called the Koreak Mana.
Yeah, because standard translations suffer from severe lossy compression.
Lossy compression.
Like an audio file. Kind of like an MP3 or a highly compressed JPEG, right? When you take a multi-layered, mathematically precise Arabic phrase and you just flatten it into a single English or Turkish sentence, you lose the metadata, you lose the structural integrity of the word.
So it just becomes flat.
Completely flat. Koreak Mana is the antidote to that. Functionally, it translates to something like broken meaning or fractured meaning. But honestly, a better way to conceptualize it is anatomical dissection.
Oh, okay. So it's not broken as in damaged. It's broken down.
Yes, broken down into its atomic parts.
Like a biologist taking a scalpel to a flower to see the cellular structure, rather than just saying, oh, look, a pretty yellow petal.
That is a perfect analogy. You aren't just reading the sentence for its aesthetic value. You are putting every single word, every prefix, every root letter under a linguistic microscope.
And we are applying this Koreak Mana methodology to one highly specific, incredibly dense phrase today, right?
We are. The phrase is Vel Al-Hakeem. It is a tiny string of code, literally just a few words. But the sheer architectural depth it contains is staggering once you unpack it.
All right, well, let's put it on the operating table then. Let's break it down. Vel Al-Hakeem. The very first component of this code is just a single letter, right? V.
Correct, the letter V.
Now, in everyday Arabic, or when you're just looking at a basic translation, that's just a conjunction. It just means and.
Right, like an ampersand.
Yeah, like saying, I went to the store and bought milk,
Oh.
apples and oranges. It's just a bridge between two thoughts.
And treating that specific letter as a simple conjunction is the first massive failure of surface-level reading. When we apply the Koreak Mana microscope, we see that in this specific structural context, it is not and.
It's not.
No. This particular V is known in Arabic grammar as the Vavul Qasim.
The Vavul Qasim. Okay, break that down for me.
It is the oath particle.
Wait, really? So the phrase isn't saying and the Quran. It is literally saying, I swear by the Quran. A single letter completely alters the entire reality of the sentence.
It fundamentally rewrites the relationship between the speaker and the listener. In the grammatical architecture of Arabic, which we call the nahив or syntax, the Vavul Qasim operates like a psychological sledgehammer.
A sledgehammer. I like that visual.
Physically, structurally, it forces the word that comes immediately after it into the genitive case, meaning it physically changes the vowel sound at the end of the word. But rhetorically, its purpose is to shatter the listener's mental barriers of doubt in the very first millisecond of interaction.
So it's an immediate pattern interrupt.
The ultimate pattern interrupt. You open this system, and before your brain can even begin to load its natural skepticism, before you can even formulate a counter-argument, the Vavul Qasim hits you. Is the creator slamming a gavel down in the courtroom of your mind and demanding absolute, undivided attention.
Wow, a grammatical sledgehammer. The gavel hits, the oath is firmly established, and then we immediately encounter the second component, El-Quran. And this is where I think most people have a huge blind spot. When you hear that word, you immediately picture a physical object, like a book with a green or black cover, filled with pages, sitting on a high shelf. Or you think of the standard translation, which is usually the recitation.
Which is, again, a very flat way to view it.
Because the Koreak Mana forces us to look at the root letters, right? The root is KRE.
Yes. The root KRE is incredibly dynamic. It does not mean to read in a passive consumptive sense. It's not like scanning a newspaper.
Or like mindlessly scrolling through a social media feed where the information just passes through your short-term memory and vanishes.
Exactly. The root carries the inherent meaning of gathering parts together. It implies a process, something that is continuously read, deeply analyzed, synthesized in the mind. And this is the really critical aspect the sources highlight. It is inexhaustible.
Inexhaustible. So it's an endless gathering of meaning.
Yes. Calling it just a book or a reading is doing it a massive disservice. It's a continuous data gathering process.
But here is where the text really throws a curveball. And this is the part of our research that genuinely stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah.
The third word in this sequence, Al-Hakeem.
Right, the modifier.
Yeah, because every standard translation I looked at renders the phrase Vil Quran Al-Hakeem as by the wise Quran.
The wise Quran. That's a very common, very flat translation.
Extremely flat. The wise book sounds like a static, dead object. It sounds like a collection of ancient proverbs or something.
Like fortune cookie wisdom.
Exactly. Ah, yes, the wise book on the top shelf right next to Aesop's fables. It implies something totally passive that you just consult when you want a nice quote for a greeting card.
And that translation entirely strips the text of its living architecture. In the Arabic language, the word Al-Hakeem is overwhelmingly, almost exclusively, used to describe living, active, decision-making, intelligent entities.
Living entities.
Yes. It is an active subject, not a passive object.
Okay, I need to push back on this a bit because my rational brain is completely rejecting the premise here.
Go for it.
A book, by definition, is inanimate paper and ink, or pixels on a screen. How can an inanimate object be an active, living, decision-making entity? I mean, that sounds like science fiction. Are you saying it's literally a sentient AI?
Let's look at what the Koreak Mana reveals about the mechanics of the word itself. El-Hakeem comes from a root that means to issue a judgment, to govern, to put everything precisely in its correct place.
Okay.
It implies an entity that observes a chaotic situation and imposes flawless order upon it. When this text is paired with Al-Hakeem, it is not presenting itself as a passive repository of data waiting for you to access it.
So what is it doing?
It is presenting itself as an active OS designed to protect the user you from system failure. When you internalize its frameworks, it actively reads your current situation, it interacts with your psychological state, and it optimizes the chaotic loops in your life.
Oh, I see. So if I understand the sources correctly, it's not that the physical paper is literally alive. It's that the conceptual framework, once downloaded into the human hardware, acts as an autonomous mentor. It makes decisions for you when your own hardware is failing or overwhelmed.
It provides the unshakable parameters for decision-making. It runs the diagnostics.
But if I am going to trust an external operating system to run my life, to essentially make my decisions for me, I need absolute proof that the code is stable.
Of course. You wouldn't install sketchy software on your laptop.
Right. I need to know it's not going to crash when under pressure. Which brings us to the mathematics of the language itself. The sources spend a lot of time on sarf and nahif.
Morphology and syntax, yes.
How does the physical structure of these Arabic words prove that this OS is permanent, and unhackable.
We have to look at the sarf, the morphology. Arabic is not a language that evolved haphazardly over time. It is a highly mathematical language built on rigid patterns, weights, and scales.
Like mathematical formulas.
Exactly. Every word is cast into a specific mold that dictates not just its meaning, but the fundamental nature of its meaning. The word Al-Hakeem is built on a very specific morphological scale called the Phi pattern.
Okay, I'm going to need an explain it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 5 Didius for the file pattern. What does that actually mean for the everyday user?
So, in Arabic morphology, the fail pattern is used to express a characteristic that is permanent, inherent, and structural. It denotes a state that cannot be altered.
Give me an example.
Let me give you a contrast. If someone is currently running, there is a word pattern for that temporary action.
Because they'll eventually stop running.
Right. But if someone is inherently, permanently a runner, it is their core identity. You use a different pattern. If someone is angry, that is a temporary emotional spike. You use a temporary pattern. But if someone is intrinsically structurally wise, you use the file pattern.
Okay, I'm following.
So the wisdom, the Hakeem nature of this OS isn't a passing trend. It's not a temporary firmware update that will become obsolete in 5 years. It is absolute. It is baked into the very atomic structure of the word.
So it's a hard-coded feature. It cannot be patched out. It cannot degrade over time. It is permanently fixed.
Furthermore, look at the linguistic cousins of this root word. The root is HKM. From this exact same mathematical root, we get the word hukum,
Which
means a final decision or a binding judgment. We get the word mahkeme, which is the physical court of law, the place where truth is definitively separated from falsehood.
Wow, okay.
And crucially, we get the word mukum, which translates to unshakable, fortified, unequivocally unhackable.
Nukem. Unhackable. Okay, so the very root of the word screams structural integrity. It is an immovable fortress. But there is a rhetorical device mentioned in our notes that ties us back to the idea of the text being alive, the concept of tesis.
Yes. In the deep science of Belaga, which is the study of profound rhetoric and eloquence, the pairing of a physical text with the living adjective Al-Hakeem is a masterclass in tesis, or personification.
Personification.
Right. A physical database is inert. It doesn't care if you read it or ignore it, but by attaching this permanent, living, intelligent modifier to it, the text is given a powerful personality. It is elevated from a passive database to an active entity.
So it becomes a mentor.
Exactly. It mentors you. When you align with its code, it validates you. When you violate its parameters, it psychologically rejects your actions. It pushes back.
This brings me to a piece of research in our stack that I really struggled with, to be honest. There is a deep linguistic nuance pointed out by the classical scholar Feridun Razi.
Ah, yes. Razi's insight here is brilliant.
He noted that the ancient Arabs used a specific physical object derived from this exact same HKM root. They used the word hikmeh. And do you know what a hikmeh is?
The rein of a horse.
Yeah, the leather strap you put in an animal's mouth to control it.
It is a vital piece of the linguistic puzzle.
I'm going to be totally honest, I hate that analogy. I really do.
I get that. A lot of modern readers recoil at it.
Because if this operating system is supposed to be this ultimate, expansive, universally wise mentor, comparing it to a horse's rein makes it sound incredibly restrictive. A rein is a tool of subjugation. It goes in the mouth. It forces the animal to turn against its will.
It sounds like a cage.
Exactly. It sounds like a cage that strips away my autonomy and my free will. Why would I want to install an OS that treats me like a beast of burden?
It is entirely natural for the modern mind to react with hostility to the concept of restriction. We have been conditioned, pretty much from birth, to worship absolute, unchecked autonomy.
Freedom above all else.
Right. But let's follow the logic of the analogy. Let's look at the wild horse. A wild horse possesses immense, raw, beautiful power. But without a rein, what dictates its direction?
Its instincts, whatever's right in front of it.
Its impulses. If a wild horse gets spooked or sees something it desperately wants across a ravine, it doesn't calculate the long-term structural integrity of the terrain.
No, it just reacts.
It doesn't analyze the trajectory. Its chaotic, destructive impulses take over, and it will literally gallop straight off a cliff. The human mind, especially today, is that wild horse.
Ouch. But fair.
We love to believe we are rational actors making free choices, but neuroscience and behavioral economics tell us we are actually driven by chaotic, destructive, dopamine-driven impulses. Razi's brilliant insight is that the Quran Hakeem acts as the ultimate necessary controller.
So you're saying I don't actually have the free will I think I have?
You have the capacity for free will, but it is currently hijacked by your own biology and the digital environment around you. The Hikmi doesn't destroy the horse's energy, it harnesses it.
It steers it.
It reigns in your dopamine-driven chaos. The restriction isn't a cage meant to punish you. It's a safety harness designed to steer you away from the abyss. It channels your raw human potential into a structurally sound trajectory.
It's the ultimate controller. It saves the horse from the cliff. Okay, that shifts the perspective entirely, which brings us right to our front door today. We aren't galloping on horseback across the desert. If this Hakeem code is a protective rein, what exactly are we being protected from in the modern day? What is the cliff?
We are galloping blindly through a meticulously engineered digital illusion. If we look at the macro reality, the global systems of economics, media, and technology, we are living in a world built entirely on what industry insiders call retention wars.
Retention wars. I've heard the term, but let's clearly define it for the listener.
Every single application on your phone, every media outlet, every social platform, every streaming service is fighting a multi-billion-dollar war to retain your visual and cognitive attention for just one more second.
It's an arms race for our eyeballs.
Exactly. They employ thousands of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to figure out exactly how to hijack your amygdala and keep you scrolling. And to win this war, the global system has reached a terrifying conclusion. Morality must be liquid.
Liquid morality, meaning it shifts based on whatever drives engagement.
That's exactly it. It must be whatever keeps you clicking. Yesterday's deeply held foundational human value is framed today as absolute shame and backwardness. Today's ridiculous, chaotic, viral trend is aggressively pushed as tomorrow's accepted social norm. There is no solid ground anywhere in the macro system. Everything shifts based on the algorithm's desperate need for your attention.
It is exhausting. Just thinking about it gives me a headache. You're constantly trying to calibrate your internal compass to a magnetic pole that is spinning wildly out of control. You never know where you actually stand.
And in the middle of this chaotic, liquid environment, Al-Hakeem stands out as the only timeless, rigid spine. It categorically refuses to bend to algorithmic pressure.
It doesn't care about metrics.
It doesn't care about retention metrics or the fleeting whims of pop culture. It is the unshakable Mukum code. It does not care what is trending. It only cares about structural truth.
That is the macro level, the global retention war. Let's zoom in on the micro level, the personal reality. I want you, the listener, to picture yourself right now. Think of a specific moment. You are standing at a major crossroads in your life.
We all have them.
Exactly. It could be a massive career choice. Do I take the high-paying job that requires me to compromise my ethics or stay where I am? It could be a relationship crisis. It could be a financial dilemma. Society is screaming at you from every glowing screen in your house. Just once won't hurt. Don't miss out. Scroll, consume, live your truth. You do you.
The noise is deafening.
And you are experiencing severe, debilitating decision fatigue.
And decision fatigue physically crashes the human hardware. Your prefrontal cortex simply cannot process an infinite number of liquid variables. This is the exact moment the OS kicks in.
How so?
When you are paralyzed by that chaotic noise, the Quran Hakeem acts as a calm, authoritative central processor. It forcefully cuts through the manipulation. It ignores the fear of missing out. It processes your specific, complex situation and generates the most rational, structurally sound output to protect you from long-term catastrophic damage.
What we're looking at here is a massive cultural collision. We have this modern culture of fast consumption colliding head-on with the inexhaustible source.
Total paradigm clash.
We are told by every interface we interact with to scroll, double tap, consume, and discard. Throw away yesterday's content. But this OS, this Hakeem entity, behaves completely differently. The sources emphasize that it expands with your cognitive capacity. It is a source that literally cannot be exhausted.
Because it is a living system. Think about it this way. If you read a standard piece of literature, say a great novel, when you are 10 years old, you understand the basic plot.
Sure.
If you read that exact same physical book again when you are 40 years old, the ink on the pages hasn't changed. The words are identical, but you extract a deeper meaning because you have changed.
Right. Your life experience acts as a new lens.
Exactly. However, with the Quran Hakeem, it goes a step further. It isn't just that you have more life experience. As your internal hardware upgrades, as you increase your capacity for reflection, the OS recognizes the upgrade.
It adapts to you.
It actively unlocks higher level functions, deeper layers of code, and more profound meaning that was entirely invisible to you before.
Okay, this all sounds conceptually amazing. It is philosophically beautiful, but I want to really stress test this.
Let's do it.
If I'm going to adopt this, and I'm going to tell you, the listener, that this Hakeem operating system is truly the universal supreme code for human existence, it cannot just sound pretty. It has to hold up against the most rigorous, ruthless academic and engineering methodologies on Earth. I want to put this text through a 4-university stress test.
I think that is the most rational approach we can take. Let's run the diagnostics. Let's see if the code breaks.
University number 1, Harvard University. Specifically, we are going to use the world-famous Harvard Business School case study method. Let's look at the 2008 global financial crisis as our prime case study. Walk me through it.
The 2008 collapse is the absolute perfect example of hardware without an OS. Think about who was in charge of the global economy at that exact moment.
The smartest guys in the room.
Yes, you had the brightest minds on the planet, Ivy League graduates, mathematical geniuses, quants who built algorithms so incredibly complex that even their own bosses didn't understand them.
They had unlimited processing power.
They had infinite data at their fingertips. Their capacity for reading data, their capacity for the literal root of Quran, which is gathering information, was historically unprecedented. Yet they drove the global economy straight off a cliff, destroying millions of lives in the process. Why?
Because they had the data, they had the intelligence, but they entirely lacked Al-Hakeem.
Precisely. They lacked the moral break. They lacked the long-term unshakable wisdom. They had the wild horse of immense, unprecedented financial power, but they threw away the hikmeh, the rein.
They took the harness off.
They built systems, collateralized debt obligations, subprime mortgages that optimized for short-term liquid gains instead of structural permanence. They looked at the data and asked, can we do this? Instead of asking the Hakeem question, should we do this?
It's pure hubris.
The Harvard case study proves undeniably that raw information, raw intelligence, when it is unconstrained by absolute wisdom, does not lead to progress. It becomes a weapon of mass destruction.
Data without a moral OS is just a faster, more efficient way to crash the entire system. Okay, let's move across the pond. University number 2, Oxford University. The home of the Socratic seminar, the deep philosophical debate. We are looking at the great question that has been debated in the halls of Oxford for centuries.
The origin of wisdom.
Exactly. Is wisdom self-generated by human hardware, or does it have to be downloaded from an external source?
This is the core debate of modern civilization. The ancient Greek sophists, like Protagoras, famously stated that man is the measure of all things.
Right.
This is the foundation of modern humanism. It is the belief that the human mind, left to its own devices through logic, science, and trial and error, will naturally iterate its way to ultimate truth and perfect moral wisdom. It assumes the human brain is a closed-loop system capable of perfecting itself.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. Why isn't that true? I mean, we built the internet, we cured polio, we went to the moon. Humans are incredibly capable of iterating and improving. Why can't we self-generate a perfect moral code?
Because you are confusing technological upgrades with moral stability.
Oh, interesting distinction.
Yes, we built airplanes. We also used them to drop nuclear weapons. The architecture of Al-Hakeem argues completely against the humanist premise. The human brain is undeniably an incredible piece of hardware. It is arguably the most complex physical structure in the known universe.
Absolutely.
But hardware, no matter how powerful, without a stable operating system, is just an expensive piece of silicon. It cannot run a self-generated moral code because the human hardware is inherently corrupted by bias, physical fatigue, tribalism, greed, and a profound inability to accurately predict long-term consequences.
So no matter how smart we get, our underlying biology keeps corrupting the data.
Look at the 20th century. We reached the pinnacle of science and philosophy, and it resulted in 2 world wars and the Holocaust. Left to our own devices, we crash.
We drive off the cliff.
Every time. The Oxford debate concludes here. True wisdom Hakeem cannot be a product of trial and error within a closed, flawed human system. It must be an external OS downloaded into the hardware. Al-Hakeem is the only OS that our own human flaws cannot corrupt, precisely because we didn't write the code. Man is not the measure of all things. The creator's code is the measure.
The code is the measure. Wow. All right, let's take this stress test to the east. University number 3, Tokyo University. We're looking at the concepts of Kaizen, which is continuous incremental improvement, and Monozukuri, the profound art of Japanese craftsmanship.
This is where we see the physical, structural perfection of the text. In traditional Japanese woodworking, there is an ancient architectural technique called kigumi.
Kigumi. I've seen videos of this. This is where master carpenters build entire houses, massive temples, without using a single iron nail or a drop of glue.
Yes, it's mind-blowing. The pieces of wood are carved with such flawless mathematical precision that they lock together organically.
Like a perfect 3D puzzle.
Exactly. They bear incredible weight. They survive centuries of massive earthquakes precisely because they aren't rigidly nailed together. They are organically integrated. They absorb the shock. That is the exact nature of the Koreak Mana of the Quran.
So the verses act like kigumi joints.
Yes. The verses, the seemingly disparate concepts, the linguistic roots, they lock together without artificial binders. It is an organically integrated system. When you pull on one thread, the entire structure supports it.
And we can expand this to another Japanese concepts mentioned in our research notes. Kintsugi. This is the art of fixing broken pottery, but instead of using invisible glue to hide the crack, they use lacquer mixed with powdered gold.
It is a beautiful parallel for the human condition. Human lives, human souls, they get shattered. We make terrible mistakes. We experience profound trauma. The hardware gets fundamentally damaged.
We all have cracks.
The modern liquid world tells you to hide the cracks, to feel shame for being broken, or simply throw the broken pieces away and buy a new one. But the Hakeem teaching acts as the gold lacquer. It does not ignore the trauma.
It highlights it.
It takes the shattered pieces of your life and pieces them back together using divine wisdom, making the repaired structure your soul even stronger and infinitely more valuable than it was before the break.
It doesn't just fix you. It elevates the brokenness into a masterpiece. That's incredible. Okay, final stop at our stress test. University number 4. ETH Zurich in Switzerland. The absolute pinnacle of systems thinking and engineering. Let's strip away the poetry, let's strip away the philosophy, and frame this in pure, cold engineering terms.
In advanced physics and engineering, you have to deal with the first principles of the universe. And the most inescapable, terrifying principle is entropy.
The second law of thermodynamics.
Right. The universe inherently leans toward chaos, decay, and disorder. If you don't actively, constantly pump energy into a closed system, it rots, it falls apart. Your room gets messy, your muscles atrophy, human relationships degrade, entire empires crumble into dust.
Chaos is the default.
Chaos is the default. The Quran, functionally, mathematically, is an anti-entropy engine.
An anti-entropy engine. I love that phrasing. I was actually reading up on systems engineering in preparation for this, looking into entropy and control systems, and I kept coming across this concept of a PID loop.
Ah, yes. Proportional integral derivative controllers.
Yeah, it's basically like a highly advanced thermostat. Is this OS functioning like a PID loop for the human psyche?
That is a phenomenal, highly technical analogy, and it maps perfectly onto the Arabic terminology we've discussed. Let's look at how a PID loop works. It has a desired set point, a perfect temperature, for example.
Right.
It constantly reads the environment, calculates the error between the actual reality and the perfect set point, and applies a calculated correction to fix the error in real time.
So how does an ancient verse act as a corrective output for my modern life?
Yeah.
Walk me through the mechanism. Give me a specific scenario.
Okay, let's say you are at work. Your boss unfairly humiliates you in front of your entire team. The immediate reality is an extreme pressure deviation. Your amygdala spikes.
The wild horse wants to rear up.
Exactly. You want to scream, you want to quit your job, you want to flip a desk over. That is entropy. That is the system rapidly leaning toward chaos.
Okay, the error signal is flashing red. The system is crashing.
At that exact second, if the Hakeem OS is installed, it runs a feedback loop. It reads the pressure deviation you rage. It compares it to the flawless set point of universal wisdom, and it applies a real-time corrective output.
Like what?
A specific verse or concept triggers in your mind, perhaps reminding you of the ultimate justice of the Creator, or the profound value of dignified patience, which is saber. The prefrontal cortex engages. The OS says, do not react with chaos, respond with calculated dignity. It brings your system back to baseline.
It prevents the crash.
It prevents the crash. It is a highly active anti-entropy control mechanism.
So it passes the stress test with flying colors. It solves the Harvard data without wisdom problem. It answers the Oxford external OS debate. It mirrors the Tokyo flawless craftsmanship. And it functions perfectly as an ETH Zurich anti-entropy PID loop.
The code is flawless.
But there is a missing link here. We have this perfect software. But how does this OS literally physically map onto your brain? Because hardware and software have to interface. Where does the code run?
They absolutely must interface. And this brings us to the neurological anchors of this system. If we look at the neuroanatomy of the brain, The area responsible for all this high-level control, the area that essentially separates us from animals, is the prefrontal cortex.
The logic center, right there behind your forehead.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex is the brain's executive suite. Its entire biological job is to break the primitive, impulsive, fearful urges of the amygdala. It calculates long-term consequences, it enables strategic planning, it delays gratification.
It's the adult in the room.
It is. But as an individual, your prefrontal cortex is incredibly fragile. It can get tired from lack of sleep, it can be hijacked by stress, it can be overwhelmed by the retention wars.
Decision fatigue strikes again. Hardware glitches.
Right. So conceptually, the Quran Hakim acts as the shared, infallible prefrontal cortex for all of humanity. When your personal prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed and about to shut down, you outsource the executive function to the Hakim OS. You let the unhackable code do the breaking for you.
But in the heat of the moment, when the boss is yelling at me, my brain is flooded with cortisol. It's really hard to remember ancient Arabic root words when your blood is boiling. This requires installing some serious mental framework so we don't forget this when we need it most. We need memory anchors. What do the sources give us?
The first anchor is a powerful visual one. Think of the sci-fi movie The Matrix.
Oh, the classic scene at the end where Neo finally sees the reality of the world.
Yes. For the entire duration of the movie, he looks around and sees surface-level reality. He sees buildings, people, agents trying to kill him. But at the very end, he achieves realization. He puts on the glasses, so to speak, and suddenly the physical world vanishes. Everything is just cascading green code.
He sees the underlying mathematical architecture of reality.
Once you internalize the Quran Hakim, you experience a similar paradigm shift. You stop seeing surface-level chaos. You stop just seeing the pain of a lost job, the sting of a broken relationship, or the fear of an economic downturn.
What do you see instead?
You put on the optical lens of Al-Hakeem and you start seeing the underlying code, the hikmet, the divine wisdom behind every single event. You see the mathematics of your reality.
You stop reacting to the illusion and you start interacting with the code. That is incredibly powerful. You realize nothing is random.
The sources also give us another mental framework, this one based on cognitive psychology, specifically the method of loci or the memory palace technique.
This is a highly effective, neurologically proven way to permanently install an abstract concept into your physical memory. I want you to visualize your own house, the place you live right now. You are walking up to your front door, you turn the key, you push the door open, and you step inside the entryway.
Okay, I'm there. Now, in your mind's eye, right in that space, I want you to imagine a massive glowing scale, like a beautiful, ancient, balanced scale of justice, standing right there in your entrance hall. It goes from the floor all the way to the ceiling.
Okay, I have the image. It's huge, it's glowing, it dominates the entire room.
That glowing scale represents Al-Hakim. It is the master calibration device for your life. By visualizing it at your literal front door, you are setting a powerful psychological trigger in your brain. Every thought, every action, every decision, every piece of media you bring into your home, into your private sanctuary, must first be placed on that scale.
It weighs everything.
It weighs everything against the unhackable code. If it doesn't balance, it doesn't enter your life.
It's the ultimate spiritual security scanner. And to lock this all in, to make sure it stays active, there's a rhythmic anchor provided in our source notes. A mnemonic that you can memorize right now, today, to keep this active in your prefrontal cortex. It goes like this. Boşluk yok, savrulmak yok. Hakim is in rotan sok.
Let's break that down for the listener. Boşluk yok, savrulmak yok. Hakim is in rotan sok. It roughly translates to no void, no drifting. If you have Hakim, you have your road.
No void, no drifting. The wild horse isn't drifting off the cliff. The rain is secure. If you have the OS installed, you have your route mapped out perfectly.
It completely eliminates the existential dread of being lost in a chaotic, meaningless universe. You always have a compass bearing.
I am amazed at how perfectly all these concepts lock together. The theory is profound, but we are a show about application. We are about to give you a highly specific, neurobiologically grounded atomic habit, a literal 30-day blueprint to physically install this operating system into your daily routine. We are going to move from the massive macro philosophy to the micro and show you exactly how to execute this starting today. But right before we get into those critical, life-altering details, a quick reminder, if you want us to keep decoding these deep layers of reality for you, make sure you subscribe to our channel and join our newsletter. Your support allows us to keep digging through the noise to bring you the signal. All right, let's get back to the execution. How do you actually install the Hakim code into a flawed human brain?
We use the proven behavioral framework of habit formation. often referred to as the atomic habits model. It requires 4 distinct stages: a cue, a craving, a routine, and a reward, ultimately leading to a profound identity shift. We have to map the Hakeem concept onto this physical reality.
Let's walk the listener through it step by step. What is the exact cue?
The cue must be a specific, physical, unavoidable moment in your day. It is the exact second you sit down at your desk to do deep work, or the moment you place your hands on the steering wheel of your car, or the very second you are faced with a hard, anxiety-inducing decision. It is the moment right before action begins.
Okay, I sit down, hands on the keyboard. That physical action triggers the craving.
The craving is your brain's natural biological desire for mental clarity over chaos. You crave focus. You want to escape the decision fatigue and the overwhelming noise of the retention wars. You want to know your work actually matters.
So I have the physical cue. I feel the psychological craving for clarity. What is the routine? What do I actually physically do?
Before you press a single key, before you speak a single word, you take one deep breath and you simply write down on a Post-it note. Or you consciously internalize and repeat the word Al-Hakeem.
Now wait, a Post-it note. Writing down an ancient Arabic word sounds a bit like, magic or a ritual.
Yeah.
Why does that work?
It's not magic, it's neurobiology. Writing physically engages the motor cortex and the prefrontal cortex. By forcing your brain to focus on writing that specific word, you are forcing the amygdala, the panic center, to power down. You are intentionally setting the parameter that your upcoming work, your next email, your next conversation is not random. It is tied to universal wisdom.
You're booting up the system.
You are consciously turning on the PID loop. You are telling your brain, connect to the OS.
Al-Hakeem. I am invoking the active processor. And the reward. What does the dopamine hit?
The reward is immediate and profound. It is the grounding satisfaction that your time, your energy, your life is not vanishing into the void. It's the sudden realization that you are not just a disposable cog in a liquid morality machine. Your actions are structurally sound. They are weighed on the massive scale. They matter.
Which naturally leads to the ultimate goal of any habit, the identity shift.
Precisely. You are no longer a victim of the algorithm. You are no longer someone who is blown around by viral trends or toxic office politics. You adopt the identity of a strategic mind acting with absolute purpose. You become the writer holding the hikmeh, fully integrated with the master architecture.
Okay, that is the daily atomic habit. But our sources also challenge us with a specific one-week mission. And this is going to require a serious, uncomfortable perspective shift for a lot of people.
It requires breaking a deeply ingrained, centuries-old cultural habit. The mission for this week is to forcefully, consciously stop seeing the Quran as a mystical, dead object.
How do we do that practically in the middle of a busy week?
This week, when you inevitably hit a real crisis, maybe it's a profound betrayal by a close friend, maybe it's crushing anxiety about your finances, maybe it's a deep sense of burnout, do not just sit in the chaos. Do not just doom scroll to numb the pain. Open the text. And before you read, ask a direct engineered question. Oh, Hakeem, what is the precise output you have generated for my specific crisis?
You are literally querying the database. You are asking the OS to run a diagnostic on your specific life event.
Yes. Look up the specific verses dealing with anxiety, with human relationships, with economic fairness, with betrayal. Read them not as historical poetry from the desert, but as direct, active commands from the central processor addressing your specific glitch. You will realize with a shock that you are interacting with an active intelligence that understands human nature better than you do.
And if you extrapolate that out, you get the 30-day transformation. For the next 30 days, your goal is to filter absolutely everything through one single question. How would the Quran's algorithm process this?
If you can maintain that filter for 30 days, the neurological rewiring is staggering. It will completely zero out your reactive emotional outbursts. When someone insults you, your amygdala wants to scream back. It wants chaos. But the Hakeem algorithm intercepts the input, calculates the uselessness of a chaotic response, and outputs silence or calculated dignified response. It transitions you from a reactive creature driven by impulses to a proactive supreme intellect.
You stop being the wild horse and you become the rider. But, and this is a massive but, there's a trap here, a pitfall that our notes explicitly warn us to avoid at all costs.
The trap is regression, falling back into the comfort of superstition, treating this text like a lucky charm.
Yes. The talisman trap. This is so incredibly common with ancient texts.
Human beings have a terrible habit of taking profound, world-altering technologies and reducing them to mere superstitions when they forget how the technology actually works. Do not treat the Quran Al-Hakeem as a magical charm you read just to pass a math exam. Do not treat it as a spooky incantation you recite only in graveyards or when someone dies.
That defeats the whole purpose.
It is a profound insult to the architecture. It is an active auditor. It is meant to audit your economy, your psychological health, your legal contracts, your marriage, and your private life. It is not an amulet to hang on your rearview mirror. It is an operating system to run your mind.
If you just hang it on the wall, you are buying a multi-billion-dollar supercomputer and using it as a paperweight to hold down your bills. It's tragic.
It is the ultimate tragic waste of human potential.
We have covered incredible ground today. We have gone from the psychological sledgehammer of the Vavul Qasim to the inexhaustible gathering root of Al-Quran to the active, living, decision-making entity that is Al-Hakeem. We have stress-tested it against Harvard's financial crashes and Oxford's humanist philosophy. We've seen its structural perfection in Tokyo's Kigumi craftsmanship and proved it functions as an ETH Zurich anti-entropy PID loop. We have mapped the code directly onto your prefrontal cortex.
We have stripped away the cultural dust, bypassed the lossy translations, and looked at the raw, unhackable code of reality.
And it all leads to this single striking thesis. The Quran is not a book that you read. It is a flawless operating system that reads you.
But understanding this architecture brings us to a critical, unavoidable junction. Because nature and the human mind abhors a vacuum. Your brain will run an operating system, whether you consciously choose it or not. If true wisdom, true Hakeem, can only be downloaded from an external, mathematically perfect, unhackable source, what corrupted, liquid, self-made code are you currently allowing to run your life right now?
Let us know your answer in the comments.